I have sat across the table from some brilliant people in Wall Street, in the military, in education, with PhDs and multiple master's degrees, people who have made decisions that destroyed their organizations, not because they lacked information, not because they lacked intelligence, obviously, not because they lacked experience, but because they had built entirely without meaning to a system that filtered the truth away from them before it could reach the decision. And that is what we are talking about today, the leadership failure nobody names. Welcome to Thinking to Think. I'm Mike Aponte, also known as M.A. Aponte. I am a published author, executive director of a nonprofit charter school. I am also a principal, educator, former wealth manager, a former military officer, and today we are going to go over that as well as some strategies that you can take now to avoid these catastrophic decisions. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get into it. Here is a pattern I have seen across every high stakes environment I have ever worked in. And this is the US Army, the New York City Police Department, Wall Street, and in public education. The higher a leader rises, the less accurate information they receive. This is counterintuitive. We assume that the power with comes from better information, more reports, more data, more access, more people telling you things. But here's what actually happens. As leaders become more powerful, the cost of telling them uncomfortable things rises. The subordinate who delivered bad news last quarter got sidelined. The director who challenged the CEO's assessment in the board meeting did not get the promotion. A teacher who told the principal the initiative was not working got assigned the hardest class. The institution learns, and what it learns is that the leaders prefers comfortable information. That is not always conscious. Most leaders would tell you and genuinely believe that they want the truth, but their behavior responses to uncomfortable truth have trained their environment to filter it out. This is what I call the intelligence failure paradox. The more authority you have, the less reliable your intelligence becomes. Military intelligence communities have grappled with this for decades. The phenomenon has a name in those circles: command climate distortion. When senior commanders signal that optimistic assessments are preferred, subordinates produce optimistic assessments regardless of ground reality. We just saw it in Afghanistan and Iraq, in corporate boardrooms before every major financial collapse, and in school districts that were one audit away from a catastrophic accountability failure, while their internal reports showed steady progress. The data was never the problem. The data was always fine. The problem was the system that produced the data. Let me walk you through the three mechanisms by which organizations filter truth away from leaders. Because if you can name the mechanism, you can start to disrupt it. Mechanism one: sycophantic selection. Over time, leaders consciously and unconsciously promote people who agree with them, not always because they want yes people, often because agreement is read as alignment, as loyalty, as being on the team. But when an organization's leadership layer is selected primarily for agreement, you have built a system that cannot generate the honest dissent that precedes good decision making. By the time the crisis hits, there is no one in the room with the credibility and the courage to say this is going wrong. Mechanism two: the presentation layer. In most organizations, information travels upward through the multiple layers of interpretation before it reaches the decision maker. Each layer adds framing, softens the edges, positions the bad news within the context of other news so it does not land as hard. By the time the report reaches the executive, the crisis has been converted into a challenge. The failure has become a learning opportunity. The structural problem has been reframed as an isolated incident. This is not always malicious. It is often just how people protect themselves and their departments when they are delivering uncomfortable information to powerful people. But the cumulative effect is that the leader makes decisions on information that has been compressed, softened, and reframed by every layer between the ground and the office. Mechanism three, cognitive closure seeking. This one operates inside the leader rather than the organization. High stress, high consequence leadership creates intense psychological pressure toward certainty. Leaders who are responsible for large outcomes need to be decisive. Decisiveness feels like certainty. Certainty requires filtering out ambiguity. So leaders develop a cognitive habit of resolving uncertainty prematurely. They land on a conclusion before the evidence actually supports it because the discomfort of uncertainty in a high stakes environment is genuinely unbearable. The problem is that premature certainty closes the decisions before all the relevant information is in. The leader who knew what was happening before the situation was fully clear was not confident. They were closed. And closed decision making is unstable environments produces catastrophic outcomes. Let me give you some case studies that illustrate this. And I will keep the names general where privacy is appropriate. Case one, a school district I'm familiar with receiving declining academic performance data over 3 consecutive years. At every leadership meeting, the data was presented in a framework that compared current performance to prior year performance, showing incremental gains with each subgroup. What was not shown was the comparison to state averages, which revealed that the district's performance was declining not in absolute terms, but in competitive terms. Every other district was improving faster. The superintendent's team had learned through the years of meeting responses that the superintendent received comparison to prior year data well and comparison to the state average data badly. So they presented what he received well. By the time the state sent a corrective action notice, the leadership team was genuinely surprised. The data they had been seeing shown progress. The problem was that the data they had not been seeing was the data that had been selected for them. Case two, a Wall Street scenario. I observed during my time in financial services a portfolio management team that built a risk model that consistently produced favorable assessments. The model assumptions had been calibrated over several quarters to match the conclusion that the senior partner were known to prefer. When I asked a junior analyst about a particular risk variable that seemed underweighted, she told me quietly that raising that variable had been tried by previous analysts. The analysts no longer worked there. The model was not a risk model, it was a justification model. It produced the math that supported the decision the partners had already made. This is how organizations fail in slow motion, not through dramatic catastrophes, but through gradual collaboration of information systems to tell leadership what leadership wants to hear. So I want to give you something practical because this podcast is about reusable thinking tools, not just compelling problems. I've never been that person to identify problems and not offer solutions. So here's some. When I work with leaders as a high stakes decision advisor, I use a framework I call the honest signal audit. It has 3 components. Component one, source incentive mapping. Every piece of information you use to make major decisions come from a source. Every source has incentives. The question is not whether the source is lying to you. The question is whether the source has a structural incentive to produce favorable information. Your finance team has an incentive to protect their budget. Your program director has an incentive to show their program is working. Your board has an incentive to believe the organization is on track. None of these people may be lying, but they are all operating inside incentive structures that shape what they surface and how they reframe it. Map the incentives, then weight the information accordingly. Component two, disagreement archaeology. Go looking for the disagreement that is not happening. In any complex organization, there are always people who see things differently from the official narrative. Find them, not to validate them, but to hear the argument. The official narrative is the thing everyone agreed to say. The unofficial disagreement is often where the real information lives. The most important conversation I have had as an advisor and as an executive director have been the conversations that happened after the meeting ended when someone pulled me aside and told me what they did not say in the room. Component three, the pre-mortem is my favorite. Before any major decision, run a pre-mortem. Assume the decision has already been made and it has failed. Now ask, what is most likely the cause of that failure? What did we miss? What did we assume without evidence? This is a technique developed by psychologist Gary Klein and popularized in organizational psychology. It works because it gives people permission to voice concerns they would not otherwise name. The premortem frame removes the social cost of saying this might not work because everyone in the room is supposed to be finding failure modes. The organizations that use it consistently report better decisions. The organizations that skip it because they are confident in the decision are the ones that generate the case studies I use in this segment. Smart leaders make catastrophically bad decisions because they have built organizations that protect them from accurate information. This is the leadership failure nobody names, not because people do not see it, but because naming it requires acknowledging that the leader is part of the problem. That acknowledgement is uncomfortable, which is exactly why it is necessary. If you are in a leadership position and the last time someone genuinely challenged your assumptions was more than a week ago, you have a signal problem. Start there. If you want to go deeper on this, the full framework is available in an essay I wrote for my Substack. The link is in the show notes. And for leaders interested in a direct advisory engagement, the link to Aponte Strategic Advisory is also in the show notes. Until next time, please remember, think clearly, lead boldly, stay logical. Have an amazing day, and thank you for listening.